Hello, everyone. I'm Brian Van Bertlew. I work at Wolfram Research as the document technology manager, um, which most of what I do is uh, I work a lot with our documentation and make sure that the documentation that we write gets in product. Now, while we're waiting, it looks like Dave asked a question here. Has anyone made an alternative documentation viewer for your docs? Is that even possible? Well, um, our documentation starts life as a notebook. So a notebook viewer would at least be able to view the docs. If you, uh, there's been some work that's gone into getting the uh, getting the documentation working in the cloud as notebooks, and those would be um, primarily HTML, maybe with some embedded notebook components to handle things like examples and interactive components. It's as far as viewing it in like Adobe Reader or something. Like, I mean, technically they could be made into PDFs, but that's not something that we're actively working on now. Okay, all right. I think let's go ahead and get started here. All right, so how this is going to work out, or how this is going to work here, I've got a few slides prepared here, and then which is mostly introduction. I want to spend a fair bit of time here going through actual demos of writing documentation. So, but it's important to be on the same page here. So, yeah, I'm hoping that some of you have gotten a chance to see Todd or Bob or Connor's talks over the last couple days. But in case you haven't or you need a refresher, let's start at the beginning. What's a Packlet? A Packlet is fundamentally just a collection of one or more files that you are making available to your Wolfram product, making available to the Wolfram language in some way. Now, you might think that a Packlet has to have code to be considered a Packlet. That's not necessarily true. There are Packlets that maybe have only a palette that is driven using built-in functionality, or maybe your Packlet has just documentation. We ship a number of Packlets in the product, in fact, that are only documentation. So a Packlet can really be any kind of files that you want to make available. The only requirement to make something a Packlet is that a Packlet info file is present. Now, I'm not going to go too much in depth about how a Packlet info file is written. Some of the other talks have gone into that, and it's a little bit beyond the scope here. But if, for example, if you've been around for a while, I'm sure you've written packages. The only real difference between having a package set up and having a Packlet is just this Packlet info file. In fact, in product, there was some legacy code that recently that was just a package, and in order to make it into a Packlet, to make it updatable via the Packlet update system, all I had to do was write a Packlet info file, drop it in the folder, and voila, it is a Packlet. So Packlets are certainly nothing to be scared of. So let's talk about documentation then. What's Packlet documentation? Packlet documentation is written and handled, written and built and deployed, just like we build and deploy and write our documentation for the Wolfram language functions in-house. All of the functionality for doing that, the authoring tools, the build tools, the deployment tools, all of that ships in the product starting with version 12.2 or 12.3. I'm sorry, I don't remember off the top of my head. I think it was 12.2, but it certainly has gotten better since 12.2. So you want to use the latest version you can. And as I mentioned before, some Packlets maybe only have documentation. Some Packlets may not have any documentation at all. Maybe they're just something that needs no documentation, or if you just wanted to share code that self-documents, that's fine too. But we have the tools to make documentation if you want. Okay, so the types of documentation that you can make for your Packlet are function pages, guide pages, and tech notes. And we're going to walk through each of these in some depth. So function pages, and I've got an example of a function page here, the plot function page. You're documenting the symbols that you write, the functions that you've written for your Packlet. Sometimes they're called reference pages. If you've looked at the directory structure of your Packlet, had to create the directory structure yourself in the past for Packlets, you would have needed to have a reference pages folder where the symbols folder would live inside of it that would contain all of these function pages. The reason for that is that internally, and you'll see that you can see this in product, we have a number of different kinds of reference pages. We've got entity pages, we've got interpreter type pages, we've got pages that talk about the WSTPC functions, and the list goes on. There are a couple dozen of them, I think. The thing to remember about function pages is they are very strongly structured. We follow and generally enforce a pretty strict structure here. You can see in the example here, the title, these usage messages up here, and then some general notes about things, and then examples. And then at the bottom of the page are the footer, and this is the footer information where you link to, say, related guides or related functions or things like that. So let's move on to guide pages. Guide pages are if you have a collection of function pages and you need to, or if you have more than one function page and you need to collect them in some order, then this is what you'd use a guide page for. Now, it's more than just a table of contents, because you can, on a guide page, you can provide context for a lot of your functions. It's suggested that you have at least one guide page for any Packlet that has more than one function in it. And if you have a lot of functions, you can in fact have more than one guide page. As we'll see in a little bit, all of these documentation pages can link to each other. You can have guide pages that link to other guide pages. Obviously, guide pages link to function pages, and all of these different page types can, and we encourage you to interlink them. Guide pages are also very strongly structured. The title, the abstract, you've got subsections breaking things down with the symbols listed underneath them. We've got delimiters, and it's pretty strongly structured. Tech notes. Now, tech notes are, if any of you have been around long enough to be familiar with the old Mathematica book that Stephen wrote years and years and years ago, for version 6, that book was torn up into little pieces and made into what we called at the time tutorials. Now, these tutorials were, they were bite-sized pieces of the book, but the intention is the same. That it's a more loosely structured narrative explanation of the content that you're dealing with. And the tech notes that you may write for your Packlets also follow that scheme. They're also very loosely structured. They're written almost like how you would write any any notebook in a just in the default style sheet, say, and you don't have sections and subsections. There's just text. I mean, there are some special constructs where you have tables, but in general, it's more free flowing and free form. Okay, and I didn't mention this one before, overviews. And the reason I didn't mention it is because they're a little, they're not really providing more information to a Packlet. They're useful to have if you have more than one tech note, especially if you have in-depth one, or a particularly in-depth notebook. What an overview does is it's a good way to provide anchor links into a particularly large one or multiple tech notes. It's really your table of contents for if say you were writing a user guide for your Packlet using a tech note, the overview would be your table of contents and might actually be the landing page for your Packlet, where people could then find what they need from your tech note and jump right to it. Okay, so writing documentation. I know some of you have probably seen from other talks the palette that we use for writing documentation, documentation tools. And you see I opened it from here, documentation tools. It popped up on my other screen, but here it is. This is what documentation tools will look like when you open it. It will start off on the function tab, the F tab. You see that the three types here, F, G, and T. Each one of these is selectable, that has their own set of buttons. And you'll see at the top, importantly, add Packlet. Now this is a button. So if you click it, then you get a pop-up for adding a Packlet. Now you want to point this to a folder that contains a Packlet info file. This one does, and there's the Packlet info file. So I click choose. It popped up a confirmation window. And this context, it documentation tools it tries to automatically pick a context based on the information in the Packlet info file. But if for some reason this is wrong, you can click change and you can change the context right here. But in this case, it's right. So I'm going to click OK. You see now it becomes WTC Packlet 1. So let's look at making some pages. For starters, here is this one is a very simple Packlet. I have another Packlet later that's a little more complex. This is the very basic. This is almost the most basic piece of code you could see. You know, if anybody watched Connor's talk yesterday, he had the say hello function. Well, here it is again. So let's go ahead and make a function page here, and we'll do a little bit more. We'll go a little bit more in depth here. Say hello, type it. And I realize now that I, in fact, already made that page. So I'm sorry, hold on. Let me, it complained that I already had a page with that name. And I thought I cleaned all this out, but I didn't. All right, let's try that again. Now we've got new function page. Say hello. Okay, now it opened up on my other screen. Okay. Now we're going to close up we're going to close up these for now. Let's talk a little bit about this metadata up here. If these tools are working correctly and you have, you know, and the Packlet, the information available in your Packlet info file is constructed as you would expect, you should not have to mess with any of this metadata at all if you don't want to. You know, this categorization metadata here that I've selected, it's very important. Your page won't build correctly if it's not correct, but as you can see, it automatically filled things out here. So we shouldn't have to worry about that. Let's look at keywords. These are search keywords. You know, when you build a Packlet for deployment, part of that process is that the documentation is indexed using our built-in text search functionality. And the one of the fields that that process indexes and weights pretty heavily, in fact, is keywords. Now, keywords should be, they would be listed 1 per cell, and you just merely type, and if you hit enter, it makes a new cell. So you don't have to click every time you want to make a new cell. You can just, you know, type whatever you want, type, whatever. That's all I need to say about keywords, I think. Syntax templates, these are, we certainly use these in-house occasionally. I have to admit, I don't actually think they're going to do anything for Packlets yet, but I want to leave them here in the template because if they're filled out, then when we get to the point where these are where this information is useful to your built Packlet, then it's here already and we don't have to force people to go back and change all of their pages. Okay, so when I made this, it automatically made the title, it automatically made this. I know Connor walked through this yesterday, so I'm not going to go too much in depth here. What I do want to show is some of the shortcuts that we have here. So oftentimes on function pages, you'll see where the function has, where the function page has documented in this area, in this details and options section, which is what this is, where they might have a table for documenting the options to the function. And so you could do that here with, you know, if you click this table tool button, you know, one of these table buttons, it inserts a blank table and you can do that. But one thing that's cool here is I've defined some options for say hello. You can, if you were so inclined, click this options table button. And what that does is it pops a dialog on my other screen. It pops a dialog where you can, in fact, it reads in the options available for that function. It reads in their default values. You can pick whether you want to include them or not. Let's just say I want to include all of them. And then you provide the options tables are typically 3 columns. So the third column is the text describing the option. So I'm just gonna, I'm just gonna cop out here and just and look, There's an options table right there. Especially if you have a ton of options, writing out one of these tables manually is it's a pain. So this options table button can really save you some time. I know Connor had mentioned yesterday this template input. I know other people who've written documentation. Template input's been around for a long time. But I do want to point out that we do have a keyboard shortcut for that. You know, if you've got a piece of text here and you can find your keyboard shortcut, when you load documentation tools, these three menu items are inserted in your menu and they've got shortcuts there. For Mac, it's Option T. So I select text, I hit Option T, and there's your shortcut for template input. I highly suggest you all use the shortcut. It's amazing, much better than going over to the button every single time. So let's see. Another thing, a lot of times your function would have maybe more than one input template. We support that too. That's right here, double usage line. If you click that button up here in the usage box, you get another one. You can type in whatever, you know, you can type in your arguments here if you want, or any arguments you want, and give the description for it. I don't have time to go through all of the buttons here, but another one that I want to touch on here, when you're writing examples, generally we've got this section down here for options where each option for your function has its own section. What you can do instead of remembering and writing your own is under the examples section here of documentation tools, we have options for function. If we click that, then it pops over here. It says the following options don't have subsections. If I'd written any here, these any that I had written already shouldn't show up here. But let's just say I want to select all. Yes, I want to insert all of these. And ta-da, we have, now I can write my specific axes option documentation for say hello. Of course, none of these actually make sense in the context of the function definition, but for illustrative purposes, that's some neat stuff. So I'm going to close some of these up to clean up the palette a little bit. Links. So as I mentioned before, we highly encourage all of your documentation to link to other documentation. Template input does a lot of that for if you're linking between symbols, but if you want to link to a guide page or a tech note, then it's then you have to use these tools that we have here. So let's say that we want to link to the the built-in list manipulation guide page. I click that, I click link to guide, and it didn't actually link to the system one. That's maybe a little bug. It should have determined that there was a list manipulation guide page in the system, I think, and linked to that one correctly. But let's say that, if it is wrong, then we can, if you mouse over, you can use the new hyperlink editing dialog. We just get rid of that part and change it. And now it's pointing to the right place. So if we click that, then this opened on the other screen. Okay, so let's move on to guide pages. All right, guide pages. So here we're going to click new guide page. We get this. Let's say we're just going to call this my guide page. And it opens up the template here. The metadata here, mostly the same. Again, shouldn't have to worry about it if you want to add search keywords. They work the same way here. So for comparison, I still have this other guide page open. Let's just walk through briefly how this would be written. So we have a title here. This corresponds to this. So its lists are central. I'm not going to write the whole thing, of course. Now this is kind of a special construct. So I'm going to just, that was handcrafted. I'm going to skip that one for now. I'm going to just go to table, and we can use our template input to link it up. Maybe. Is that going to break? Well, I'll have to look at that. But anyway, make a table. So these one-line listings correspond to this one-line listing. These inline listings, that's these. You can add new one-line listings, by the way, by clicking the one-line function listing button. That inserts a new one every time. These inline lists correspond to this. You can get to that using functions inline listing. Functions inline listing actually is also a toggle. So if you had, I only have one function here, but if you have that in here, have the cursor in here in an inline listing, and you click this button again, it toggles it up and automatically links any that are there, which is pretty handy. For subsections, we've got constructing lists, element of lists, things like that. This is a subsection button. Delimiters that are here, we got a delimiter button. You probably won't have to use text too much. There's an option for it. If you had anything, any one-line listing like this, where you wanted the left-hand side to not be a function, say you wanted it to be a link to a web page, and you wanted to just have a plain formatted HTTP link there, then you could just make a text cell. The rest of talking about links, that all applies same as it did for the function page. So let's move on to tech notes briefly. Again, much the same way. Click new tech note. My tech note, just for speed. This is the base template where you've got text. This is where you would list those functions in, for example, in a, does this tech note? Okay, something like this. This is what this turns into, is a table that looks like this. You got the text, these examples, these example captions, and the input output. That's these groups here. Like I said, tech notes are very loosely structured. You can have sections, you can have subsections. It's also worth noting that these, the style shortcuts up here for writing tech notes are all, they're listed here. You can find them under format style. They work. They make things a whole lot faster than, again, mousing over to the palette every time. If you want a section, you can just Command or Alt on Windows 1, and my section, my subsection, etc. So now, what do you do? Let's go a little bit deeper here. Let me close out some of this stuff. I want to leave documentation tools open though. Okay, let's look at a more complex package here. So here's a package that has 4 symbols that all have code. And let's say that you want to make function pages for all these. Well, first, let me add the Packlet that this comes from, which is example Packlet 2. And again, I get my confirmation. Okay, let's go back to functions. I want to make function pages. Well, here's something a little easier than making them all by hand. Under tools, we've got generate function pages. We click that, we get a nice dialog over here. Now this dialog can be a lot to digest here, so let's walk through it. Packlet name, that's self-explanatory. If you want to only make pages for some of the symbols in your package, then you could choose selected and then get a list. I want to do all. The directory, this is where it's going to save them. Now this is kind of neat. In some of these usage messages here, you see that I talk about returns true and false otherwise. This figures that out and tells you, whether here are some system symbols. What do you want to do with them? Do you want to link them to the system symbol or not? And this list is what it found, and then you can, if you wanted to only link false but not true, or you wanted to, or vice versa, or whatever, you could change these. If you didn't want to link any, you could leave it blank. So, okay, this all looks good. So I click OK. It's putting them all on the other page here. Now, what this mostly does is it handles the usage information for you. Unfortunately, it's not smart enough to write examples, so you'll still have to do those yourself. But what it does do that's pretty cool here is if you look at the available kernel queue usage message, you can see that it has, the 0 arg form returns true if there's one available, and then it has a 1 arg form. The generate function pages figures that out, and it automatically makes 2 usages for you, and it it template inputs and links everything up for you. It's nice in that way. So it's a good jumping off point when you want to make your function pages, and it gives you a good place to start. You still have to enter all in all your notes, and you have to write all your examples, like I said, but it gives you a good start. So let's see, what else can we automatically generate? So in this second Packlet, I wrote a couple tech notes, and here we can just look at them. Look at one here. Let me back up here. If you have existing documentation for a Packlet, all of these have open function page, open guide page, open tech note. If you click that, you get a nice dialog that lists those things that are available, but also lets you, if you had a bunch, you could even run a search on them, and that would update this list down here. So what I did before was I clicked open tech note, and from there I clicked, these are links, just single click links. So I clicked compressing data into images, and it opened up this authoring page. So I've got a couple tech notes here. And I talked about overviews. So we can make overviews. You can make an overview yourself by clicking the new overview page, and you would have to write all of this yourself. I'm sure many of you can tell where it's going here, but the generate overview button here, we click that, we get this nice dialog that pops up. We can name our overview, overview, whatever. This granularity, so if there are sections or subsections, or this tells the overview generator what's the depth of grouping that you want to show up in the overview. So we're just going to leave it a section. Let's say I want, and the order you pick them here is the order they show up in over here. So, if you pick them in whatever order you want, you click OK, and on the other screen we've got Packlet overview that querying kernels. I guess the one I didn't open did have some sections in it, and we have, and you can see that they're here. If this had subsections in it, they would have shown up here as well. But the page didn't have subsections, so I didn't bother with it. Okay, so that's a very, very brief. Oh, you know what? I already forgot something. If you're writing something for your Packlet that you want to exclude from the built version of the Packlet, maybe it's a note to yourself, maybe it's a piece of functionality that's still coming. Then what you can do is you can select the cell that you want to do this with, and there's a section here. It's a section on every one of these tabs, F, G, and T, called Futurize. And the two options under here are selection and whole page. If you have a cell selected, and if you wanted to futurize just a piece of your document, you can select a cell and click Futurize, and it shows up nice and bright and pink here, so you know that it's very clear that it is futurized. You get a little dingbat over here with a mouse over that tells you who futurized this and when. On the other hand, if you had an entire page that you wanted to futurize, you can just have the selection be anywhere in the page, click whole page, and you get a big pink banner at the top that it's a docked cell up there, so you can't lose it and can't miss it. It just says future up there. Any page that has this marked, any page that has this futurized setting on it will not build in your documentation for your Packlet. Any cell that you have here that is marked as futurized will be omitted. It will be deleted. Now, you can get in trouble here if you futurize your title and don't have a title. Then a lot of these pages will hinge on correct cell grouping. You might get this text might start grouping under the metadata at the top, which it'd just be a mess. So you do have to make sure you have to be careful what cells you futurize, but it's I think that's pretty handy. Okay, so The last thing I want to talk about here is the Packlet Inspector. Last thing I want to talk about for documentation tools is the Packlet Inspector. Now I got to that from up here in the picker. There's a Packlet Inspector underneath Add Packlet, and what that does is it tells you, it pops up this dialog that tells you all of the Packlets that documentation tools knows about. Now, of course, it's not, documentation tools isn't going to go spelunking on your system. It's not going to find Packlets that you haven't told it about. And that's something that I've been trying to stick to very strictly with documentation tools, is that it doesn't muck around in any non-documentation files for your Packlet. If you've written code, that code is saved. Documentation tools will not touch your code. It will not insert code, and it will not insert code. It will not insert option tables. If you have a Packlet info file, it will read it. It will not write it, and that's important because if you're seeing here that these little X's will delete the Packlet from this table, it did not delete it from your file system. It's just making documentation tools forget about the Packlet. Now that gets a little bit confusing here if you have, those are links, right? It pops up the, when I clicked the link of where the Packlet was, it popped up where it was in the OS Explorer. If you click change here on the folder, you can in fact change where you want it to go, but that won't actually move the files. The reason that you would do this is if you moved the Packlet yourself on your file system, and then you had to tell documentation tools where you moved it to. So that's, again, documentation tools is not going to touch your file system except to create and edit documentation pages. And in here, it tells you whether or not the Packlet is loaded, whether there exist documentation directories for it, which when you tell documentation tools about one of your Packlets, it automatically creates documentation directories for you. If for some reason you deleted them, this would turn into a create now bit of text that you would click and create them again. You can select which Packlet is the current Packlet. You can see up here, that's showing which one's current. You can see it change as I select it. And then, like I said, you can remove it from the list by clicking that. And if you click them both, then you're back to the vanilla no Packlets loaded state. Okay, now the last thing I want to talk about, I promise this will be the last thing for the talk. Stephen, in his keynote, I'm assuming many of you caught the keynote, he mentioned something about custom guide pages. Now, custom guide pages aren't specifically Packlet documentation, but it is a guide page, and a lot of the functionality in custom guide pages is going to make its way to the Packlet documentation authoring experience. So I want to talk about it real briefly here. So we go to File, New Documentation Guide Page. Specifically the look of these kinds of pages where it's a little, you can see it's a little fresher. It's not Verdana font anymore. This is Source Sans Pro. You've got toolbars, you've got buttons here with toolbars. This is the design direction that we're going with the templates that you find from documentation tools as well. And we're hoping that for version 13, things will look a lot more like this. But a lot of the quality of life improvements that I've worked on for custom guide pages, I'm hoping also make it. The biggest things about custom guide pages that I like is you got better navigation. So, clicking these are actually placeholders instead of text. You don't have to, double click and a 4X's to select it to type. You just click once. Within a given cell, you can navigate back and forth with tab. I can show you here. You can cycle through things, even if there are things typed here. You can still cycle to them. So navigation, I like. The other big thing that's coming here is I'm hoping that we can get away from having to manually link everything. The intent here with custom guide pages is that they're going to be, these are primarily used to link to system documentation or maybe WFR functions. These are not really tied into the Packlet experience yet. And so given that, I know that I can make a determination based on the information that you provide here, whether what it should link to. And by that, I mean, if you wanted to make it a symbol, that's the default, right? But if you see when I mouse over, I get this little button up here. This pops a menu, and you can pick. These are the default types of things, default types of reference pages. But if you wanted something a little more in depth, you can click Add More. If you check any one of these, let's just check a few here. We close this window. Now, if we go back here, they're all here. You can pick any of these that show up here. And when the page then is built for deployment, then it will automatically link to, it'll set up the link target as if you were linking to, a built-in predictor. So more to come about custom guide pages. They are coming in 13. So feel free to experiment with them. But you'll see that the templates from documentation tools will look more like this before too long. Okay, and then so in conclusion, in about 23 minutes, we're having a meetup, Packlet Development Workshop meetup. And that's with myself, Todd Gailey is there, Connor Gray is there, Bob Sandheinrich is there as well. This file is available on the on the meeting page for this webinar. And so check your agendas if you want to come to this meetup. The idea is that for any of the Packlet, if you have any Packlet questions, documentation, code, deployment, development, whatever, come there, ask. It's an hour long. We'll all be there. So let me spend about 1 minute looking at questions here. Okay, I see somebody did ask about the file new documentation guide page. That was close to the beginning of my talk. Yeah, they're related, but they're not quite the same. They're not really part of the same story yet. So I think I've at least talked about custom guide pages a bit. And Jesse Friedman asked, will documentation tools source notebooks be updatable? Like, I assume you mean the templates, or maybe did you mean the content based off of something that you've deployed to, say, the Packlet repository? I'm hoping that they will be updatable. There's no plumbing in there yet for it, so maybe that'll be a 13.1 thing, but they should be. It's a good idea and it makes sense. So the point about documentation tools not being visible in 12.3. So no, you don't have to install something else. It looks like there have been some replies. I'm going to make sure that, oh, yeah, Connor got it already. Great. Never mind. Okay, I think we're about out of time here.